to start today, what I want to do is just kind of paint the picture for you guys. One thing, so I've hired a business coach and I've had a business coach for the last, well, almost the last year, and just helping me with different mindset shifts and different ways and perspectives to look at business. And it did help us with some of the businesses that we had, the marketing and whatnot. It helped me with as far as coaching chiropractors and also too with my future goals. It's helping me with that. And so one thing that it has directed me into is looking at different CEOs and their style of leadership. And one fellow that I've really started following quite a bit is a fellow named Jon McNeill. And if you don't know who Jon McNeill is, Jon was the CEO of Tesla through approximately 2015 to 2018. And the interesting little history of him is that he built six different companies from scratch that he then took and sold publicly. So they became very, very successful companies. And now, after his time at Tesla, he's on the board of big companies like GM, and he's also on the board of Lululemon. So he's quite an interesting guy, very, very deep thinker, and just seems like a real down to earth family man. So I really enjoy listening to him. And he has a book called The Algorithm. But in this book, he talks about his time working with Elon Musk and how Elon basically recruited him and brought him into the fold and encouraged him then to become the CEO of Tesla, and how they took, or how really he in his leadership, because Elon was somewhat disconnected and basically put the onus on the CEO, on John, to grow the company. And at the time, Tesla was under a $2 billion a year company, and he took it in a period of 2.5 years to be over 20 billion. So, and he talked about how he did that and how he delegated his authority. So I want to kind of go through that because what I've done is I've applied that to chiropractic practice. So I think what we're going to talk about today is really going to be helpful for you guys in helping you manage your team and your systems to get your communication really streamlined. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here because I've made quite a few notes on this. So I'm going to call this the chiropractic growth algorithm, basically named after the book that Jon McNeill wrote called The Algorithm. And it's think like Elon Musk. So in other words, scale your practice like Tesla. So what we have to really do is we have to start shifting the frame. So it's shifting our mindset. And one thing we talk about often, especially in this group, is we talk about putting in systems into our office. And one thing I want to make sure is that our systems don't become so robotic that we overlook the necessity to change those systems to become better or to grow better or to deliver better care or see more people. So growth is really a problem with mindset. So growth is not a problem with systems, it's really a problem with mindset. So we're going to really get into mindset stuff today. So because the difference between a 500K per year practice, so let's say you're collecting, 40K per month or somewhere in that neighborhood, 45K per month, you're collecting 500K a year. That's a healthy practice, which is great. But for many of you who either want to get to that point or you want to grow past that point, there's a lot of thinking that has to happen. So then there's, different levels of practice, the $1 million a year practice, the $2 million a year practice, or I know and talk regularly to people who have multi offices that are collecting over 10 million a year, $1 million a month for the service they deliver. So it's not tactic, it's not systems, it's really the operating system in your mind. And this is really based on what Elon talks about and what Jon McNeill talks about in his book. So here's the Elon story. And this is really, so for those of you who haven't really studied Elon Musk, this is really, really important stuff. So he's going to be the first trillionaire on the face of the earth. But he's built multi-billion-dollar companies. So he has a template that works very well to build and scale companies. And so I want to really kind of dive into some of his thinking because if we can apply that to practice, it'll really help us to streamline some of our procedures. And here's the thing. So he really relies a lot on building a team. So when Elon interviews someone, he doesn't necessarily care too much about resume. He doesn't care where you worked or what your experience is. He goes straight to tell me about a problem that you solved. So Elon really looks for problem solvers. And I want you to kind of think about this when it applies to your team, to your staff. So he goes deeper and deeper and deeper into the problem. Like, how did you come up with this? What were some of the variables? How did you figure out the best way to solve that problem until one thing becomes completely clear with the person he's interviewing? Did you actually do the work, or were you just there when it happened? And that's really important. And we're going to dive into that a little bit today as we go through this. So here's when we apply this to chiropractic. So you don't necessarily grow your practice by hiring an experienced person or hiring nice people or hiring just the available people. You grow your practice by hiring problem solvers. And this is one thing I want you to take back to your team and start asking intentional questions about getting them to the place where they can become really good problem solvers. Share a vision with them, give them a template of how you want it to be handled, and then let them run with it. And this is one thing where I think generally our profession is not really good at. We're a bunch of micromanagers and we don't really know enough on how to solve the problems in our practice to help us to scale and grow. So here's the application. So next time you hire a CA or an associate, or maybe even it's a marketing team or marketing person, you don't necessarily ask what experience you have. You ask, tell me about a time where you increased conversions. What was a situation in your life? Maybe it was a job, maybe it was another situation where you played a significant role in increasing the conversions of whatever it is you were converting. Or tell me about a time where you convinced somebody not to quit, because these are the most important things in a team member, is helping people to, is giving them the right messages or asking the right questions to help your potential customers or patients make the decision that they need to make for themselves. And that's where a lot of people get stuck. A lot of people want care, they know they need care, but for some reason they talk themselves out of it. So that's where our team has to be really good at helping them decide to make the decision to jump into care or follow through with care or stay under care for the long term. So you want to just keep going deeper on that note. So your practice will only grow to the level of your team's thinking. Okay, so we're going to dive into this. So the first principle, you win or lose on your talent. So here's the thing with Tesla. So the Tesla leadership team spent 60% of their time interviewing. And why was that? Because their focus was on growth, and talent was the number one growth driver. So when we translate to chiropractic, most chiropractors, we spend so much time in our practice. So 80% of our time is adjusting, managing patients. 15% of our time is putting out fires. And typically, most of us spend 5% of our time or less training or hiring the right people. So really, that becomes backwards. We really need to focus and spend a lot more time on building up our teams. So what we have to do is we have to shift to scale. So we must become what we call a talent sniper, and not necessarily a desperate recruiter. And the key insights from Tesla were, don't hire from easy environments. Hire from people who had to fight to win. So in other words, let's say you had somebody apply to your office as a CA and they worked in a fully booked systems driven clinic. So that's one CA who worked in a fully booked systems driven clinic. Would you rather hire that CA, or would you rather hire a CA who perhaps came into a struggling clinic and helped that clinic to grow? And that's where, like, the second person would be somebody who really understands reality and maybe would have some skills to help you advance to the next level. And one example that Jon McNeill talks about is, he said, if you had two salespeople come in and one person worked at Apple, but the other person worked at Microsoft, he said the Apple salespeople are not good salespeople. He said Apple trains them extremely well. He said the Apple systems are incredible, but in most cases, there's such a high demand for Apple that the Apple salespeople are more just simply order takers. All they would do is just take orders, because the product has already sold itself. The culture that Apple has created has already sold itself. Whereas Microsoft, the salespeople there were really having to dig and grind to make their commissions and make their sales, because the demand for Microsoft has gone down so much, so significantly. And he said, so he would rather go to the successful Microsoft salesperson, because they're the ones that really show that they can, make the sale or ask the right questions or help the person make that decision. So the second principle that Jon McNeill talks about was ground truth is greater than data. So what he did is he didn't necessarily analyze spreadsheets so much. He actually went onto the floor. So he went into Tesla stores, he test drove cars, he really experienced the process. And this is really interesting, because he talks about what he find is that there was one situation where he was actually talking to Elon. This was just before he became the CEO. And he said, how are your sales based on what your goals and your quota is? He goes, well, our quota is to sell 12,000 cars in a quarter. And he said, so far we've only sold less than 3,000 cars, and we're 2/3 of the way through the quarter. So he goes, we're not going to make our quota. And John said, well, that's really interesting. So what he did is he actually went to the salespeople and he figured out that there were 9,000 people during this quarter that had actually gone and test driven a Tesla, didn't buy, but they weren't in the callback loop. And he figured out, and this is such a simple thing, but he actually discovered it. And he said, you don't have a marketing problem, you have a follow-up problem. And what happened was is that he just basically went in to the sales team and said, none of those salespeople will make any new commissions on new test drives, and we're going to restructure their commissions to say they're only going to make commission on the people that have already had a test drive. So what happened is all the salespeople started following up on all the people that had test drives, and they ended up making their quarter. They sold 9,000 vehicles in the last month of the quarter to make that quota in the quarter. And so Elon came back to him after that quarter and said, I think you're going to fit in just fine here. So that's when he started as the CEO of Tesla. It's a pretty interesting story. Simple, but here's the thing, and that's where it struck me so much because, and I could say we could have used this in our clinic. We did it quite well to some extent, but we could have done it so much better. And I know you guys, and I've seen this too from the experience that I've had in the marketing world, is that so many offices, so many people rely on new leads, new people, new patients. But the follow up with people who came in for day one or came in for day two or even got to day three, looked at their care plan, saw their care plan, said, let me go home and think about it. Let me talk to my spouse. Maybe even came in for day four, didn't commit to their care plan, paid for their adjustment, and disappeared. There's so many of those people that don't get followed up on. And this is where I think the gold lies in growth in your practice. And and I'm going to say for you guys to go back to your team, and even if you were to hire a part-time person or get one of your current CAs to take initiative, take responsibility for all those people that showed up for their day one, day two, day three, never made it through their first month of care or never made it even into their first few adjustments and disappeared, there is gold in them there hills. Like I think that is something that if you guys put a plan together in your practice to follow up with those people, even to follow up, have a conversation with them, say, hey, we noticed you stopped care. What were the reasons behind that? Was it a cost issue? Was it just something you were not satisfied? Were your results different than what your expectations were? Wherever the difference is in that communication gap, that's what needs to be found out. So this is where it comes the brutal truth is that we really, for most offices, we don't have a lead problem. You have a follow-up system problem. And I can tell you that one thing, and I know through the years and we were really, really scheduled as far as our team trainings, our team staff meetings, like we were very, very good at that. And I know we had a very good team, and I would be very confident that any of my team members could go anywhere in the world and talk very intelligently about chiropractic, and I would be very proud of the way that they described chiropractic or what we did in our office. Um, but there was always that those people that slipped through the cracks. There was always those ones. So that's one thing that I would say, if we can really tighten the gaps there, fill up the holes in that leaky bucket, and have a system to follow up with those people, that would be huge. So here's the action step for you guys for this week is I would say in your next staff meeting and write this down. And I would say, bring this to your team, whether you take it to the next huddle, your next staff meeting, whatever, and say, okay, what is our system for calling every missed reactivation? And sure enough, somebody, and your team's going to say, oh, well, we follow up with them if they miss their appointment. But then what? If they don't show up, if they don't make another appointment, if they don't call back, then what? Where's that follow-up list? And we've talked about keeping stats, and I know I've talked to you guys about keeping your monthly sheet of all the new patients and knowing exactly where they are in the process and having a new sheet every month. So you can go to your staff member and say, what happened to John Smith? He came in September of 25, and she can go back and look and say, oh, John Smith made it to his second adjustment. He converted to a care plan, and then he never showed up again, and he asked for a refund. Whatever that might be, exactly where they are. And then to actually have a system where you can reconnect with every dropped patient and have some sort of an exit interview so where the commonalities of why they quit. And that is huge for building your practice, building your business. Okay, the third principle, friction equals opportunity. And this is again a Tesla principle. So, where's the biggest level of friction in the process? So, entrepreneurs don't look for ideas, they look for friction. Where are the friction points? So, Jon McNeill studied in the process, he studied this collision repair business. And this is again before he went into Tesla, but he brought this mindset into Tesla. And he said, in many collision repair shops, it would be 18 days to fix a car. So let's say you have a little fender bender, your car goes in, you lose it for 3 weeks. So the average was 18 days to fix the car. But in those 18 days, there was only 6 to 8 hours of actual work done on that car. So 6 to 8 hours, I mean, if it was done systematically, there's a gap there. It could have been done a lot faster. So that was where he tried to figure out, how can I minimize this friction so that the gap equals opportunity. So what does that look like in your practice? And I'll point out a couple things here for you guys. Where's the biggest friction in your practice? And this is one thing to talk about with your team. So when a new patient calls, how effortlessly or how easily is it for them to actually book their appointment and get into your office? So what are the steps in doing that? And are there friction points in doing that? What is the first visit experience like? Is it exciting? Is it fun? Is it something that's going to help them to understand why they need to be there for the rest of their life? What's your report of findings like? What are your financial conversions or financial conversations like? And the care plan compliance. So where are the biggest levels of friction? Where is the block in these people converting and becoming lifetime patients, if that's what your goal is? So the exercise is, ask yourself, is where are the patients struggling in my process? Because every single friction point is a leak in your revenue. So let's just say the example. So if patients don't understand your care plan, that is not their fault. If patients choose to say, no, I'd rather pay as I go, that's your fault. That's a communication friction problem. That's something we need to understand. So if you're getting a lot of, I need to pay as I go, or I can't afford it, or this doesn't work for me, that's a communication problem. So we need to try to figure out where is the gap in communication. Okay, the fourth principle is that Tesla was very exponentially focused on growth. So think 10x, not 10%. We talk about this all the time. The goal was 20x improvement at Tesla. Well, why does this matter? Because small goals create small thinking, but big goals force you to reinvent your systems. And here's a really cool thing, and this is one of the things that really struck me in this entire process. Elon had this vision that people would buy a $120,000 car sight unseen, all online. That was his vision in creating this. So when you buy a Tesla, for those of you who have Teslas or if you've never bought a Tesla, the whole process is online. So you can go online and go click, 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 and buy a Tesla. When Jon McNeill came in, he found that there were 64 clicks to buy a car. So he goes, every click created a point of friction. So he goes, there was a lot of drop off throughout those 64 clicks. So what he did is he said, when you order a Domino's pizza, it's 10 clicks. So he wanted to bring it down to 10 clicks. So what did that require? Well, they had to totally recreate their entire business model. Remember, he's trying to take this from 2 billion to 20 billion. So what did they do? They totally recreated their business model and they minimized the number of variables when you buy a car. Because if you go on, let's say you go on and you want to buy a new BMW or a new Chevy or a new Ford or whatever, you can go on the Ford website and you can build your car. And there's a lot of different options and you can check, your color, your interior, is it cloth, is it leather, your package, the model of your car, lots of different variables. So he basically said we need to minimize it. So we need to minimize the number of variables that we offer so that people don't start thinking about, well, do I want the white leather? Do I want the black leather? Do I want the white rims? Do I want the black rims? Do I want the off-road tires? Do I want whatever it is, whatever all these different variables are. So they basically limited it down so you only have a certain number of options. And I thought this is a beautiful analogy for chiropractic. And I'm going to say this is something that I believe that in creating our practice, one thing that I did, and I really recognize this in studying all of this spinal correction. I know many of us are into spinal correction, and we get so caught up in how to mark the x-rays and how to read the x-rays and drawing the angles and the different angles and so on, and then the different ways you would adjust this and all of the different rehab models, the head weighting, the body weighting, all that stuff. And honestly, it got so complicated for me. I thought, I can't even explain this properly. So, what I wanted to do is I wanted to simplify it. So, literally, every single patient that came in, their process was they would get an examination, be taught about subluxation. We would check posture, bilateral weight. We would do a neurological scan, and we would do an x ray. And I focused on the lateral cervical x ray. And our goal was anybody who had less than a perfect lateral cervical curve, regardless of their symptomatic presentation. I didn't care if they came in with knee problems, lower back problems, headaches, sinus, heart disease, cancer. It didn't matter. If they had a cervical curve that was less than perfect, that was my goal, and that was my communication process with them, is we need to improve the cervical curve. And it became really successful, and it was easy, it was streamlined, people understood it, and we had really good conversions of our care plans. And the main goal was to get that cervical curve corrected. So everything that we did in our office, people were getting better, people weren't getting better. The bottom line is, was their cervical curve improving? Were we correcting subluxation and getting that cervical curve to improve? And that became the main communication model. So when I talk about destroying the entire business model, many of you are over explaining everything. And patients get confused, and a confused patient will not sign on to a care plan. They just won't. So that's one thing we really have to start realizing. And that's when I said at the beginning, many of you are going to want to go back to your office and start to just totally recreate your entire practice and communication model and just simplify it. Make it simple. So ask yourself, what if your patient experience was 10 times better? What if your conversion rate doubled? And what if retention went from, so let's say 30 visits to 100 visits? Where would your practice be? And you can do it by recreating the way that you communicate. So you can't just tweak your way there. You have to really look at the entire system. So the fifth principle, and again, this is right from the book, when Tesla talks about, and this is Elon's whole thinking, is that you take an entrepreneur like him who's built several multi-billion dollar companies, he can't do it himself. So he has to recruit the right team members, but he has to compensate them well. So in this case, in this example, and we talked about it just a few minutes ago, is that the salespeople didn't follow up. It wasn't because they were lazy, it's because they just weren't paid to. So the chiropractic translation is that, our team is doing exactly what you have rewarded them to do. And we've talked about this often, is that if you don't have an incentive program for your team to grow or to retain patients, you really need to do that, because you're expecting your practice to grow. You're expecting your team to do things that they're not compensated for. It's not going to happen. So if your CAs aren't rebooking, or if they're not calling back the patients who miss their appointment, ask yourself, what's the incentive? If your associates aren't building retention, what's the incentive for them? If your front desk isn't converting, what's the incentive for your front desk? Is there an incentive for them closing on care plans or getting people from pay as you go onto a care plan? Is there some incentive there? And if there's not, well, it's probably never going to happen magically. So talk about putting that into place. So people optimize for how they're paid, not for what you say. So Elon recognizes this in all of his companies and has systems to make sure that he hires great people who are great problem solvers, good communicators, deep thinkers, and he compensates them extremely well. So the action is, so audit your compensation. So, and again, if you want to set up a call with myself or Brian to go over that, we've talked about this on several of our calls, is have a compensation program. I have some wonderful bonus structures that work incredibly well, profit sharing structures for your team, which work very, very well. So figure out your KPIs, key performance indicators, figure out how you're going to bonus and compensate those people, and align it with patient outcomes, retention, and growth. If that's what your goal is, you want to grow, make sure your team is compensated for the growth. The sixth principle, simplicity scales. So Tesla eliminated 360,000 car configurations. I was just talking about this. So all the variables that you could have had with all of those different clicks added up to 360,000 different configurations of vehicles. So they replaced it with 2 to 3 options. So when you go on the Tesla website and you want to order a Tesla, you can literally order a car start to finish within a matter of just a few minutes. It's very, very simple. So complexity kills growth. So again, how do we translate that to our practice? We over-explain things, we overcomplicate care plans, and we overload patients with choices. So if you can narrow it down to have, and we've said this before, is that one like standard flagship care plan that is your high level, high ticket care plan that includes everything, and then a secondary care plan, which is probably the normal care plan that you're trying to deliver now. You're going to make it so simple for patients because they only have this choice or this choice, and once you start playing like getting away from playing Burger King chiropractic where patients can have it their way, and you start improvising and making these care plans custom made for each patient, that is what drives your team crazy, and that will slow down your practice big time. Okay. So confused patients don't commit. So the actions are just simplify the care plans, simplify the pricing, and simplify the communication. It becomes very, very simple that way. It'll make your life easier. It'll make your practice much more successful. So communication framework, the Tesla style. So every conversation should answer, what is the problem? So in our case, what's the underlying problem? Why does it exist? And how do we correct it? And then what's the solution, right? What's the solution? And have the care plan set out to say, this is the solution to correct this problem. Very, very simple stuff. And then you just get commitment. Um, the final frame. So here's the chiropractic algorithm based on Jon McNeill's book and the chapters that go through that. Here's the entire system. So number one is observe the reality. So here's a situation. And I did this often. And I mean, we were lucky to do that because my wife would be seeing patients or one of our associates would be seeing patients. And I'd go up to sit at the front desk and I would just watch. I would just be quiet, or I'd say hello to the patients, or, have some small talk with patients as they came in. But I would watch how the team interacted. I would watch how the phone was answered. I would watch how they input stuff into the computer. I would watch the interaction with the patients. I would watch the closing CA, like when patients came out from their visit, were their appointments pre-booked, just simple things like that. Their payments, if they had to stop at the front desk and pay, and I'd look for bottlenecks. I'd look for areas where there was points of friction. And I don't know if I really identified that I was looking at that point, but these were the things I would actually be looking for. So you watch patient flow and just experience your practice. One thing we used to do with our team is we would, regularly for staff meetings, is once a month, we would literally walk out into the parking lot and then walk in through the sidewalk, in through the front door. We'd look at things. We'd look at the gardens. We'd look at the cleanliness outside. We'd look and see if the paint on the outside of the building needed redoing. We'd look at the inside front foyer, where people put their boots. Was it messy? Was it clean? I'd look for dust webs up on the lights, because we had an old century home. We had a chandelier in the front. I look for dust web, just little things like that. So experience your practice and really look for areas where patients are noticing that you might be just oblivious to. Find the friction points. So where are patients confused? Where are they dropping off? And if you're not taking stats on a regular basis, man, you got to start doing that. Every single new patient, and follow through how many times they're coming in and where the drop off is. Where's the pattern? Step number 3, ask a 10x question. What would world-class, how do we get this practice from where we are now, not just to 10% better, but how do we double it? How do we triple it? How do we collect from, $30,000 a month to $300,000 a month? How do we make that change? Kill assumptions. So a lot of your old systems have been in place for a long time and you haven't really analyzed them. You just do it because you do it. And your team, especially if you've had team that have been there for more than 5 years, and many of us do have team members who've been there for a long time, they're still doing stuff they did 5 years ago when you saw 100 people, 200 people, 300 people less than you're seeing now. So we need to start modifying those, old belief systems, the old BS, the old belief system. And this is how we've always done it. You can ask your staff, this is how we've always done it. And you don't revisit it. So start revisiting those things. Rebuild the system, simpler, faster, better. And I can't tell you this enough, keep things simple. Your communication should be impactful and simple. I have a coaching call today with another client, and I just watched their doctor's report. And I'm going to tell you, and they have a good practice. I'm going to say a good practice, 300-400 people a week. It's a good practice. They make great money. They want to grow, but that's the main level of friction right there. Is the doctor's report literally is almost an hour long and it is boring. So we're going to talk about tightening that up, making it shorter, making it much more impactful, improving the communication. Upgrade your people. So start analyzing your staff, hire problem solvers, train your thinkers, and build leaders in your team. So the real challenge, so based on the whole big takeaway from Tesla is not necessarily innovation, it's not technology, it's not Elon. It's they built a system where great thinking happens every day, and they're constantly rethinking the outcome. How can we make this better? Not just a little bit better, but how can we if we have to totally break everything down and redo it so we can jump to the next level, that's what we're going to do. So the question is, are you running a chiropractic practice, or are you building a scalable system to transform lives? And when you start to apply this algorithm, impact, income, and freedom, literally, and this is the biggest point for you guys, we have to build systems and get our team so good that it frees up our time. So we become less of the micromanager and the doer of everything, and we become more of the CEO in your practice. And that's when practice gets really fun. Okay. And most importantly, people get the care that they need, and you see differences happen.